Welcome, everybody. Today, we're going to do a short review of policy and procedures review for providers at Learning Happens Home Child Care Agency. We're going to go through a series of slides, and I'm going to walk through exactly what each of these different policies mean. First thing I want to say is that we are here today to talk through this because, as you know, if you've been a provider for a while, these are called annualized policies. In other words, yourself and your residents need to sort of walk through each of these important policies and procedures in the licensed home child care space every year to be sure that everybody is informed, they know what they need to do, and what steps they need to take if they need to get the agency involved, if there are any incidents, that sort of thing. So very important for us to kind of go through this on a regular basis. And then also these policies, these 21 policies, are part of a list from the Ministry of Education through the Child Care and Early Years Act. And they are required by law to be gone through every year and for providers to be able to ask any questions or have any concerns that they want to raise. So we're going to walk through each of these. You're going to have a listen. And then if you have any questions or comments or concerns, you can go to your home visitor and have a conversation with them, and they'll be able to help you through it. There is a procedure that the agency is going to take with you in terms of getting your signature and your residents sign off, which we will talk about a little in the end. So the first one we want to discuss today is about the program statement. Now, this is a multi-page document that Learning Happens has created that walks through the specific ways that the agency is saying to the government and to parents that they're going to have care happen, the quality care delivery within home child care. And as providers, it's important for you guys to know that this exists, to know the information within it, which talks about the different approaches that you would take to taking care of children and to dealing with families, and that you're aware of your responsibilities in regard to that. And this is something that on your monthly home visit, when the home visitors come through, that they have a look at how you're handling children. Are you having positive interactions? What type of program that you're delivering with children? So this is a very important piece that you need to be aware of, the contents of it, and then to be following along with how this delivery is made. The next policy is about monitoring and compliance. So there's a specific policy that the agency writes on behalf of the government request around monitoring how all the different levels of things are happening in your home because you're in a licensed childcare setting. So the monitoring happens from the consultant. They come out and have a look at your home in one of the pieces in a quarter. So once every 3 months, they have a look at the various things that are happening in their caseloads to make sure everybody's complying with the policies and procedures that are happening. And then if there are any contraventions, then they will take the next steps with you. Mostly is just sort of a conversation and you figure out how you're going to resolve that, but it can be up to and including termination of your contract with the agency. The next piece is about criminal reference checks, or the vulnerable sector check that you have to do to become a provider. You're all aware of that. And then once every 5 years, you have to get that done again, just to update to see if there's anything that's come out of the woodwork in that perspective. Also, your residents who are over the age of 18 also get criminal reference checks. Anybody who's currently in the home for any period of time over like a visitor's not, but yes, if someone's a resident for part of the year in your home or permanent residents in your home have to get criminal reference checks done. Additionally, just as a reminder, any providers that leave service for a period of time, they have to provide a new criminal reference check when they come back after an absence. And during the 5 years, say that you got your criminal reference last year, for example, every year after that, for the next 4, you'll be getting an offense declaration written on behalf of yourself. And again, offense declaration for any residents in your home. That basically is a sign off, a writing that says that nothing untoward, nothing criminal has happened in that year point, annual to annual. So you'll do a criminal reference check, and then you'll do 4 offense declarations, and then do your criminal reference check again. The next policy is about serious occurrences. So the provider has an obligation under the Child Care and Early Years Act, the CCEYA, to be sure that they report anything that happens in their home under one of the 5 serious occurrence categories, which we're going to look at in just a minute. But overall, your responsibility as a provider is to be sure that you report to your home visitor within 24 hours of any one of these serious situations happening. There's a legal obligation to have that reported. So you have to make sure that you get in contact with your home visitor, and then you follow up on any required actions. There's a whole procedure around that, which is in your policy binder that you can have a look at any time to review what that might be. And of course, if there are unreported situations or any falsified information, there can be severe fines attached to that. So what are the serious occurrences? So these are the 5 areas that would constitute a serious occurrence. First of all, God forbid, the death of a child during childcare hours within a home childcare premises. Any suspected abuse, neglect, or the allegation of that while receiving care in the home. Any life-threatening injury or a life-threatening illness, and they receive medical care during time in your care space. An incident where you're receiving care, child's receiving care, and they go missing or they're temporarily unsupervised. And then the final serious occurrence is a bit of a catch-all, but that would be anything that closes down care during your care hours in your space. So that could be an evacuation for a gas leak, that could be a carbon monoxide detection, that could be that you have a health and safety concern. Maybe there's an outbreak that you've had to close your care for. So that would constitute a serious occurrence. The next policy is about child abuse. And that again is covered under the CCEYA, the Child Care Act, but also on the Child and Family Service Act. And that is the responsibility of the home child care provider to report any suspected case of child abuse that they are thinking is happening to the child when they're outside of the care home, either in their family's care or in another adult's care. And the provider has to follow a specific set of circumstances to report that. The agency can assist you in understanding what your obligations are, but they can't make the report on your behalf. You have to actually make the report to the agency and then allow the Child Services Agency to continue, the Children's Aid Society continue to investigate and discover whether anything is happening there. The next policy is around the safe arrival and dismissals of a child. So this is a particular policy that was put in place last year from the Ministry of Education, and that is the provider has an obligation to make sure that they check back with the family when a child is expected to be in care, but they're not. So those 2 particular circumstances, they haven't arrived within their usual set time that they usually come, and you don't have any explanation. So there are times when children don't show up, and then you call the family and they go, oh yes, Jamela was sick this morning, she won't be in, maybe she'll be back tomorrow. That's not a safe arrivals perspective. It's when the child has not shown up, you expected them to, and then you have not been able to get a hold of anybody within the family. So there's a specific set of procedures that you follow along that. You make sure that you contact family and the emergency alternate contacts. And if there is no response after 30 minutes, you're going to connect with the agency and speak to the home visitor, who will then take additional steps. So it's just to be sure that, if you're expecting to have 6 kids show up in the day, that you're making sure you're checking all of them off. And if they're not there, that we're at least trying to check into why they have not appeared. And then the same thing occurs at the end of the day when you're dismissing children back out. If the child is to be dismissed, but you've not heard from family at all, and the family is late, then after that 30-minute mark, you would contact the family, of course. But if you haven't heard back from them, then you get in touch with the agency, and then we follow the next steps, because this might be a case of no one's coming for the child, and we have to arrange for that. So the other side piece of this safe arrival and dismissals policy is regarding after-school dismissal. If families want to have a before and after-school child, elementary age child, be able to leave your premises and go to their own, there has to be a written procedure for that, followed by you and the family. The next policy is a behavior and guidance and prohibited practices policy, specifically related to the ways that you treat children while they're in your home. So in a professional learning care situation, there are rules and guidelines for how you approach handling what you do with children when they are giving you challenging behavior, or if you have interactions between children that aren't working, or if you're trying to correct any type of other behaviors that might be coming up. So these approaches and guidances are within your program statement that we mentioned very first in this session today. You can go back and have a look at what the recommended approaches are. And there are additional trainings and approaches that are explained and modeled for you during the course of time from home visitors and from other training that you might have. So looking at the program statement will give you the basics on what you should follow through. And then, of course, there is a behavior guidance policy that lays out how you go through it. And the specifics within the behavior guidance policy are around delivering positive interactions for children, to having a responsibility to understand where behavior is coming from their age and stage. So a 2-year-old's response to something is different than a 6-year-old's response in some ways. And we have to be prepared to use the right type of behavioral guidance tool to help resolve those situations. The policy, the behavior guidance policy is also about appropriately applying consequences to children and using the correct strategies after setting expectations. So all of those are pieces that help you build that good relationship with children and allow you to sort of understand what's happening with kids, guide them properly, and then to make proper explanations to families when behavioral issues come up. And then, of course, it is about avoiding the prohibited practices under the Child Care and Early Years Act, which are there is no corporal punishment, physical punishment of the child in any way. We do not restrain children other than for safety in a high chair to eat, but we don't put them in there for a punishment or a discipline. And we don't use any other type of restraint on children whatsoever. We don't confine the child in any spaces, either for discipline or just in case of separating them from other children. We make sure that we don't use harsh or degrading measures to correct children. And D, depriving the child of basic needs. We don't do that in licensed child care either, including restricting them from food, drink, shelter, sleep, going to the washroom, what clothing they want, bedding they want for sleeping, any of those things. And then, of course, inflicting any bodily harm on children, including making them eat or drink against their will. And the last piece of behavior guidance policy revolves around the monitoring and compliance piece. Specifically around this, there are some extra steps that the home visitors take to make sure that they're observing what they need to see in a licensed home child care setting. And of course, you yourself have a responsibility during the year to have a specific time that you're reviewing with residents in your home, the adult residents, what the appropriate approaches are. The next policy is around medications. So there are some important things that you have to understand around that, and there's a procedure written out for that in your policy binder. And that mostly regards medications that families are wanting you to administer during care hours. Now, we can spend time with families and try to arrange for any medications for children to be administered at home under a parent's care. That's the best case. That's the preferred way you'd want that to be happening with you. However, if there's a case where a medication has to be administered to a child during the care day, you need to have a written explanation from the family of what the doctor's instructions are on applying that medication. And that covers a variety of things, including that it's the right medication, the right child, the right time, the right dosage, and the right method. You also have to store medication appropriately in your home. Usually you have 2 medication storage locked up provisions, one that's a refrigerator version, one that's a regular room temperature version, and that you have access to any medications that have to be administered to children in a fanny pack and readily available when you're outdoors, if that time period is going to fall in your outdoor playtime. And also, if you have any non-prescription medications, that they have a written instruction on how to apply it, and that they are locked up inaccessible to children as well. Additionally, there may be some times when you have over-the-counter skin preparations like sunscreen, lip balm, insect repellent, diaper cream, hand sanitizer, those types of things. So that can have a blanket authorization that you're allowed to apply that as needed. And that needs to be written up with the specific step-by-step and signed off on by the parents. So that's appropriate. And then again, with any naturopathic medications or natural products, again, a parent's written authorization and instructions on how to administer it. Separately from the medication policy is an additional policy around anaphylactic issues. So children may have um, um, an anaphylactic issue or a throat closing type of allergy for which they need additional medication, and that would usually be an EpiPen. So providers must be able to not only understand what those specific issues around the child are and then limit the access to children in your home to any of those things that might be triggers of anaphylactic shock. You must also be able to use the EpiPen, which is usually taught through your standard first aid course, and then also be able to store the EpiPen appropriately and have it available in case they need it. This also means that there's a written explanation of what should happen. It's kept in your home and posted so that everybody, including the other adults that reside in your home, are quite aware of which children might have this particular type of allergy, what are their triggers, and then what are the steps that they have to take in order to resolve it. If you administer an EpiPen to a child who's having an anaphylactic reaction, then that's an automatic call to 911 because that's only a temporary relief of the symptoms and the child will need medical care. Also, you have to be aware of the types of things beyond foods that might be within craft or art or sensory types of products that are in your home that might also trigger an anaphylactic reaction, which includes both foods and craft supplies, that sort of thing that might be in your home when childcare is closed, because in some cases, children might have sensitivities to residues that are in the space. The next policy covers discrimination and encourages inclusion. So those are two separate policies, but they revolve around the same issue, and that is that licensed home childcare is available and open to every child who needs it, no matter what their background, whatever the family composition has, whatever economic status that a family has, and whatever perceived preferences are happening with individuals, whatever belief systems, whatever age, whatever race range, whatever would be the descriptors that you would have with a family and children. Childcare is open to all. And the provider is required to make sure they give an environment that is inclusive of everyone, no matter where they come from, no matter what their needs are, and that we don't exclude any family or any child from care, and that we make sure the environment that the children are operating in have materials and experiences that reflect that sense of inclusion and that everybody is welcome. So we make sure that our toys, our music, our pictures, our books reflect the children, that they can see themselves in the materials and the experiences that are presented in childcare. The next policy is around provision of equipment. This is a policy that requires providers in licensed home childcare to make sure that they put into their space, into their environment, specific types of equipment that are appropriate for the age and developmental stage of each of their children, and to make sure that that equipment is maintained in safe condition, it's clean, sanitary, it's in a state of good repair, and that if anything happens that damages equipment or materials, that those are taken out of the space and everything is maintained properly. That includes also that providers must spend a certain amount of the fee that they get for taking care of children in constantly upgrading and improving and replacing equipment or supplies that they need to do in terms of the children in their home at their right stages to make sure that they're giving good quality care. The next policy is around supervision. So specifically, this relates to making sure that the provider is the only sole person taking care of the children. They're the one that's writing the contract with the agency. They are the one who's in charge of supervising all children. So the children are never allowed to be left in the care of someone else during your care day, unless you have a specific provision from the agency and the parents in terms of allowing a child to be released to go on their own, or another sort of extra contract type of situation that might come up. But generally speaking, the provider is always 100% in supervision of the children in the space. And it breaks down via age groups. So children who are under the age of 6 must be in direct eye contact with you at all times unless they're resting in another room. And children over the age of the 6 are considered to be under supervision within your home space. They can be in another room as long as they're being checked on. So there is a split for ages. If you have someone else in your home who's with you, they are never left in complete control of the children, and they're not to be supervising children directly. The next policy is around accidents. So if an accident happens in a home, there are specific procedures that you must walk through to make sure that the child is being taken care of appropriately from a first aid perspective. And then also there is an accident report and reporting you need to do for families to let them know what has actually happened within the home. So there's an accident form that you fill out explaining all the circumstances and what first aid was taken, if any. And then also the incident of the accident has written into your daily written record, and you are posting those accident records on your parent board, and you're making sure that it's provided to the family as well to make sure that everybody's aware of what's happened. And in addition to that, if an accident occurs and then it suddenly becomes something for which outside medical care is needed, then that becomes a serious occurrence that has to be reported upwards to the Ministry of Education. The next policy is a lengthy one in your policy binder. It's about sanitary practices. So there are lots of sort of individual incidences within there that is describing specific things that you have to do to keep your premises safe and clean and disinfected over different periods of time. So there are a lot of different elements to this, including hand washing and sanitizing. Hand sanitizing when hand washing is not available. There are procedures around diapering and toileting and how you do that appropriately with different children. There is an extensive list of things that you need to do with your toys, equipment, and furnishings, including how often you are going to clean and sanitize those particular pieces of equipment. And there are specific instructions on how to go about that with bleach and water solutions, depending on whether it's a regular cleaning session or whether it's because of a body fluid spill or whether there's an outbreak of illness, that sort of thing. The information within your policy is coming directly from the IPAC or the Public Health Instructions for Sanitary Practices. So there's quite a long, lengthier version of that you can look at, but your Learning Happens policy lays out all the individual instructions, and that's something that you're needing to be aware of and that your residents are aware of as well. The next policy is around fire and evacuation. So the first part of that is related to what types of safety equipment and setup do you have in your home to protect children in case that there's some kind of emergency situation, either a fire or any other type of thing that's causing you to have to evacuate. So first of all, you need to have working fire safety equipment, smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors. You must have a working fire extinguisher in the appropriate place, and you need to check them regularly to make sure that they're working. Secondly, you need to have an evacuation procedure that you practice with the children and that you do a practice drill once a month, and that the home visitor participates one time a year with to make sure that everything is working properly and the children understand. And that evacuation procedure includes having several pathways out of the space and that you practice getting out of your home space from those different things throughout the year, that you have an emergency signal that children will recognize that means stop what you're doing and come gather by me, that you have a safety point outside of your home that you would gather at, and that all that information is given to parents so that they're aware of if there is a safety situation that happens, where they would go to find you if you have to evacuate. And it is a good idea to have a mapped out evacuation map so that children can absolutely see that represented visually, as well as what they would learn from you by listening to what the instructions are or by practicing it. There is also a policy on standing bodies of water. And so under the Child Care and Early Years Act, and also within the municipality that you're currently living in, there are rules around children being having access to water of any depth within childcare, licensed home childcare premises. So what the agency has set is a rule that basically you're not having any standing water accessible to children within your home care, that if you do water play outdoors, you're doing it with buckets, you're doing it with hoses, you're doing it with spray guns, that sort of thing, or that if you are going and taking children to a water play location off premises, that it's the splash pad or splash park type of situation, that you make sure that you're not having children in connection with standing bodies of water during your hours of care. There are provisions within the Act for older kids, but the agency has made the decision that during care hours, you're not going to split children up to go in various stages. You're keeping it with water play that's safe for them. The next policy is around provider training and development, and this is more from the agency's perspective, what they need to deliver to you as a provider, and that is they have an obligation to make sure that they keep providers current with anything that is changing or updated in the Child Care and Early Years Act, or anything that's updated within the program statement, or anything that is within the assessment for quality improvement, which Learning Happens has adopted as a quality standard, to make sure if there's any changes to that, you're upgraded with that. And then in addition to that, to provide every provider free of charge additional training based on their interests or based on what the agency wants to bring forward as key critical issues in quality care delivery. So providers are encouraged to undertake all of this skill development or training, and the agency makes a plan every year to be able to deliver a series of training to the providers, again, accessible and easy for them to get at. The next policy is about sleep supervision. This is a very important policy around sleep, depending on the age and the stage of the child. So first of all, the home care provider is complying with the sleep provisions within the policy that are set out by the CCEYA, and that parents and providers together have conversations about the sleep habits of the child, so that during rest periods in the day, the child is getting what they appropriately need to comfort them and get them able to sleep or rest properly. And that if the children are over that 18-month stage and before 5 years, that they're allowed to have a rest period up to 2 hours per day, that that's arranged on appropriate types of furnishings like a cot, that they have appropriate blankets or pillows as needed, and that if children are unable to rest during that time period, that they're given other things to do, quiet things, so they're not interrupting other children, but they're allowed to be up and around. Under that age of 12 months, children can sleep at any time during the day when they're not restricted to a specific period of time. They are going to sleep whenever they feel they need to be resting, and that the appropriate way to lay down an infant is on their back. If they then change during sleep, that's fine, but they at least start on their back in the current medically accepted way for infant sleep. If children are having a rest period, the provider's obligation is to make sure they're doing regular sleep checks and recording that on their documentation. And that if a child is sleeping separately in a different room and there is a monitor, that the monitor is checked appropriately, but those visual checks are still happening. We do not rely only on the sleep monitor. And then the waitlist policy. This is an obligation, again, of the agency to make sure that families and providers are aware of who is on the waiting list and at what level. So if families are waiting for a spot, they can get information from the agency on request as to where they sit within that waiting list, and that the agency has an obligation to explain to families when they want to start with the agency what type of position, how many people are waiting for specific age ranges, and that they're making sure that if there's any changes to that, or if there are any additional providers that come in to service in a particular geographical area, that families are connected, that are contacted, sorry, and made aware of where their position has shifted. And that is also information that's available for a provider. If they have empty spots, they have access to the wait list so that the agency can help match people with those empty spots. The next policy is around parent issues and concerns, and that is sort of a joint policy that covers parents and families and providers, and then the agency together discussing their way through any serious concerns that come up that need to be sort of mediated or acknowledged. And that gives the provider the ability to have a proper process to go through if there's a situation that comes up that they need to raise with the family, and the same with the family wants to raise with a provider. So there's a series of steps that the agency would take to make sure that all information is gathered from either group that are discussing this situation, and then any concerns that are raised are taken seriously, they're talked through, and then a reasonable solution is come to between the family and the provider to make sure that those are resolved as quickly as possible. And the next policy, and this is the last one, is around withdrawal. So there's a formal policy that the agency has set up to govern when children are removed from care, either from the parent's perspective, in other words, they're taking their child or children out of care because they're moving or because they're going to another provider, whatever the circumstance might be. And the requirement on the family side is that they have to give 2 weeks' notice to the provider, to the agency, that the child is going to be withdrawn. And that is to cover the provider because, of course, this is an income that is coming to you for these children. So that 2 week notice is set in stone and has to be followed. Also, parents are informed that the providers need to give 2 weeks notice if a child is being withdrawn from care for various reasons. There may be a situation where the child is aging out. It may be a situation where the child is not melding in with what the provider can provide. Maybe this is a child that needs one-on-one care and that can't be done in this mixed age, multiple child setting. So in any case, 2 weeks notice must be given to families when children are withdrawn. This is the 21 policies we just went through. You need to be able to sign off on those, provide a signed sheet back to your home visitor, and then assign a time period in which you're going to go through this with your residents and make sure they understand these particular policies. And then there's a sign off for that as well. And you keep a copy of both your sign off and the resident sign off, and there's one for the agency as well. So that concludes the policy review. Pretty dry topic, I know, but it's important for us to go through that every year and understand it. Again, if you have any questions or comments or concerns, please get in contact with your home visitor or with the agency personnel and ask your questions and get clarification. I hope that the rest of your day goes very well, and we will see you again at another training session. Thanks very much.